One of the most universal moments in every person's life is the one where you're blissfully unaware of something being outdated. Whether it be a terrible fashion trend, a fad that everyone is over, or a joke that got played out within minutes of its debut.
What's up? You guys remember that one?
We all can recollect an instance where we returned from summer camp as a kid, or a drug bender as an adult, only to find the things we thought were cool have run their course. Brave New World is that kid returning from camp. This movie perfectly encapsulates that awkward feeling of being trapped in a bygone era.
That is so 1991.
A film which has seemingly figured out ways to make every single mistake, many before even being released. Whether it be the bloated budget, complete lack of direction, or the fact that it's a direct sequel to the series with the most cringe messaging in all of post-Endgame MCU.
You've got to do better, Senator.
It's safe to say this latest installment is about 3 years behind the curve of the cultural zeitgeist. But is Captain Falcon dead on arrival, or did the copious amounts of reshoots and rewrites redeem this wad of shit snowballing down Turd Mountain? Just an upfront warning, I have no intention of stopping, so heavy spoilers ahead, and also I guess I might as well tell you that this story is an absolute mess. It's very clearly a patchwork of multiple scripts, so I'll do my best to keep this Frankenstein's monster shambling in the right direction. We open up on a tired-looking Thunderbolt Ross at his post-election rally shortly after securing victory as the President of the United States. He gives a lethargic speech which finally acknowledges the gigantic celestial head sticking out of the Indian Ocean after a mere 4 years. This is followed by a series of newsreels reminding the audience about the events of the Incredible Hulk. It also name-drops Samuel Stearns, a character we haven't heard about since 2008. I wonder if that's going to be relevant at all. Before we can even process any of that, we join Sam Wilson as he prepares to drop into Mexico to interrupt a handoff of a top-secret package from the Serpent Society. He immediately disregards an order to go in stealthily in favor of a louder and obnoxious American-style approach. As he arrives, he's informed that Sidewinder, the leader of the Serpent Society, is there overseeing the transfer. They act as if the audience should know who they are, but if you're asking yourself who the fuck are Sidewinder and the Serpent Society,
fuck if I know.
Don't worry, you're not alone. Unless you were a fan of Captain America comics in the mid-80s, you most certainly have never heard of them since they have not been set up at all in any of the previous 400 MCU projects. Sidewinder is holding hostages, prompting Sam to forego pursuing the package and go after him instead. Because Sam can't be in two places at once, they activate Falcon number 2, Joaquin Torres, from the bench. Sam tracks down Sidewinder to discover the Serpents are already there prepping the package for transport. This means that they didn't need to call in Falcon number 2 after all, and Sam didn't need to deviate from his original objective. Either they desperately needed a reason to get Torres involved, or no one caught that during the reshoots they put both Sidewinder and the package in the same room.
Piss on this fucking turd.
Sam fights some random nameless dude, and Joaquin is able to secure the package, which is a sample of adamantium, but more on that shortly. Since Joaquin is now going to be part of the team, Sam takes him to see Isaiah Bradley, the forgotten Captain America, for training. Sam receives a call from Ross inviting him to the White House. He asks Bradley to accompany him, but Isaiah isn't too keen on the idea. Mostly because he still has a slight disdain of the government for, imprisoning and experimenting on him for years. The invitation serves two purposes. First, to highlight the clear tension between Sam and Ross, especially when the president mentions reviving the Avengers. Sam would rather not re-establish the team if they need to answer to the president, which is a little silly considering the fact that's already his job as Captain America. Secondly, it highlights what one could charitably call the main plot of the movie. You see that giant celestial head that no one gave a shit about for nearly half a decade? Well, it turns out it's packed full of adamantium. Never mind that that's not what adamantium is at all. Obviously, the entire world wants it, and Ross has dedicated his first 100 days to hammering out a treaty with other countries, most notably Japan. While Ross is giving his presentation, we randomly hear the song Mr. Blue, which causes several members of the Secret Service and Bradley to go into a trance and open fire on Thunderbolt. Never mind that there's literally zero chance that anyone could possibly know that Isaiah was going to attend this event, but the plot demanded it, so he's there. After Bradley is detained, he is already set for trial and a possible death penalty despite the ongoing investigation. Holy shit, the law works fast in this universe. We're introduced to Ruth Batsaroff.
Don't know, don't care.
Former member of the Widow program and security advisor to Ross. She is there to continue the trend of completely unrealistic girl boss characters. Sam goes to visit Bradley in prison. Isaiah doesn't remember shit, and Wilson decides he needs to get to the bottom of all this. This is the point it truly becomes a disjointed mess. For incredibly long periods of time, nothing really happens as characters go from point A to point B discussing things which are occurring. The story slows down to a crawl as we're shown several intersecting plot lines, such as Sidewinder's vendetta against Sam, which pretty much boils down to him just wanting to kill a Captain America. I guess it doesn't really matter which one. The public faith in Ross and his treaty waning as his authority is undermined by outside forces. He also has his own personal struggle with needing approval from both the public and his daughter, who we never see until the final scene. A returning Samuel Stearns using Manchurian Candidate-style mind control, wanting to exact revenge for being held at a black site and used for his gamma-enhanced brain, which apparently translates into him being a human probability calculator rather than a comic-accurate telepath for some reason. Also, he definitely looks a little bit like a clicker from Last of Us. There are also other smaller subplots like trying to train up the new Falcon and Sam feeling like he can't live up to Steve Rogers, which he 100% can't, by the way.
You're a terrible hero!
Wasn't that like the entire point of your TV show? That was clearly money well spent.
Shut the hell up.
One or two of these plots would be fine, but when you try to make all of them work, it just creates a disorderly, confusing, and downright laborious grind for the viewers to get through. There is no greater testament than the fact that the guy in the row in front of me, the only other person in the theater, might I add, fell asleep. This film's dubious claim may be as a discount cure for insomnia. All these subplots eventually culminate in a naval standoff between the US and Japan near the Celestial Head. It is here that Stearns plans his magnum opus to discredit Ross for never following through on his promise to pardon him for his connection to Abomination destroying Harlem in 2008. However, Sam and Torres are able to stop the convoluted plot which involved brainwashed fighter pilots who once again no one could have predicted would be there. Now you're probably wondering where the fuck is Red Hulk? He was all over the marketing, especially the Chinese marketing which suspiciously censored Anthony Mackie. Well, as it turns out, he's only in approximately 10 to 15 minutes of the end of the movie, and you've already seen most of it. Surprisingly, this was the only part I found myself interested in at all, despite having it spoiled to shit. But first, a little backstory. For a number of years, Stearns aided Ross with a heart condition by supplying the now president with experimental pills which were secretly laced with an increasing amount of gamma radiation. Wait a minute! You're telling me that this guy was held at a top secret black site with everything he could possibly need to take over the world? Seriously? None of this makes any fucking sense at all. Why would this hyper-intelligent megalomaniac villain be allowed to develop a way to mindfuck anyone within earshot of a Spotify account? And Ross thought this was the ideal person to provide cardiac medication? He might as well have ordered them from a shady Chinese website. At least then he'd likely get sugar pills or lead poisoning. Anyway, Ross's bad decision-making skills caused him to slowly mutate and Hulk out in Washington, D.C. Because, you know, the stress of the election campaign was never enough to do this, but a simple press conference was. But who gives a shit? Now we get to have a sequence of a giant angry red monster destroying the White House. Which I really hope isn't some sort of political illusion. Through the power of bullshit Wakandan power armor, somehow the completely outmatched Sam defeats Red Hulk and Ross opts to live out the rest of his days in the raft, resigning from his presidency. But hey, at least his name goes on that adamantium treaty. What a cobbled catastrophe. This film isn't just a turd, it's a turd after you've eaten a fuck ton of corn. Nothing is consistent and it's plain to see that the kernels are connected by nothing but shit. Oh, and by the way, if for some reason you decide to go see this piece of trash, do yourself a favor and leave right after this. The post-credit scene is literally just Stearns saying that there's other universes out there, something we already fucking know.
Alright, I get it!
There's a lot to be said about the direction they have taken the MCU since Endgame. By choosing to fast-track to the abysmal, all-new, all-different era of Marvel, they have effectively sped past 5 or 6 decades of quality stories to embrace the single worst point in the company's 80-year history. There is no greater example of this than the decisions they've made with Captain America. After parting ways with Chris Evans, effectively ending the Steve Rogers era, it was all teed up for them to utilize one of, if not the greatest Captain America run of all time. The one written by Ed Brubaker. This is considered by many fans to be not only the best collection of storylines for the character, but in all of comics within the 21st century. For the uninitiated, it was the stories covering both the lead-up and aftermath of the Civil War event. Bucky Barnes was revealed to be alive, unveiled as the Winter Soldier, and eventually succeeded Steve Rogers as Captain America following the latter's death. Its quality is marked for questioning morality, redemption, and whether or not it's possible to overcome the darker aspects of one's past to embrace the greater good. They had already been using segments of this with movies 2 and 3 respectively, so one would assume that this was the route they would go. But nah, fuck that shit. Why bother using one of the single most awarded authors in the character's history when you could jump straight to the worst-selling lolcow period ever? Unfortunately for Anthony Mackie, this all translates into him being the poster child for Disney's continued movement of diversity over good storytelling that has plagued the MCU for half a decade. Don't get me wrong, he's a good actor who did very well in the limited role he has had as Falcon since his debut.
Don't say it. Don't you say it.
left.
Come on!
But nothing about this guy has ever screamed leading man of the largest franchise in all of cinema. And the character itself hasn't exactly done much to change our minds. Let's just think about this for a second. When we first met him in Captain America the Winter Soldier, he was an airman past his prime and getting ready to retire. That was in 2014. Even if you account for the fact that we have no idea what year this is supposed to take place in and Thanos snapping him out of existence for 5 years, that's still 7 years minimum on an already broken down body, but now he's supposed to be good enough to take up the mantle of the greatest soldier in human history?
Man, shut the hell up.
Pretty much since becoming a member of the Avengers, Falcon has done nothing to warrant the massive push he received at the end of the Infinity Saga. I mean, his fucking highlights up to this point have been getting his ass kicked by Ant-Man and saying,
On your left.
when given a chance to shine as a primary character, he was actively damaged by the mediocrity of his own show.
You have to stop calling them terrorists. What else would we call them?
The truth is that Falcon should never have been expected to slot in as a main character, whether it be on screen or on the page.
It's really important to me that Cap never finds out about this.
At his core, he's always been best as a side character, not expected to follow in anyone else's footsteps. And that's exactly what he feels like in Brave New World. At no point did Mackie ever truly feel like the main character.
Man, shut the hell up.
Likely a byproduct of Marvel Studios' abject failure to create compelling characters for more than 5 years. There were certain points where I found myself wondering which other hero was going to show up and take control of the situation, because Sam Wilson clearly isn't that guy. When I think of all the classic Captain America villains, you know who doesn't come to mind? The Red Hulk. Somehow this film was both a complete waste of the character and the actor. To place Red Hulk outside of any film involving Bruce Banner is asinine. Thaddeus Ross is intrinsically connected to Big Green. This is nonsense on par with that dumb shit Sony has been doing with the Spider-Man villains. Additionally, the most intriguing aspect of Red Hulk's debut was the mystery surrounding his identity. The MCU has never shied away from deviating from the source material in order to create surprises, so for them to not even attempt in the slightest to mislead the audience shows how little creativity is left.
We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
I'm not sure there has ever been an actor whose legacy has been tarnished as quickly as Harrison Ford. If I didn't know better, I'd think that Disney had a personal vendetta against the guy. I mean, after completely destroying 2 of his most iconic characters, one would assume they would just leave the man alone. But rather than let the king of I'm too old for this shit lounge around in his mansion wearing Depends, they have once again dusted his old ass off. This time it's to play a character he had nothing to do with. I guess all that honor and respect of not recasting characters has a minimum melanin level. Side note, since nostalgia baiting is all the rage right now, why the fuck didn't they just give Sam Elliott a call to reprise this role? Hell, the dude still looks exactly the same as he did back in 2003. Nearly the entire time Harrison Ford is on screen, he comes off as confused as to why he's even there. He did his best with the material, but clearly has zero connection to General Ross whatsoever. His performance feels so out of place, akin to when your English teacher went out on maternity leave and the principal had to act as a long-term substitute. Yeah, he's completely capable, but he's clearly picking up in place of someone more suited for the job. Honestly, it's really sad to see an actor I used to view as the coolest motherfucker on the planet relegated to a simple lapdog for the mouse. And I like to believe that deep down he wishes that when Disney came calling a decade ago, he would have just told them to kindly go fuck themselves.
I am Mickey Mouse.
How dare he?
As for the rest of the cast, well, they certainly exist. Among the glut of supporting characters, the most prominent is definitely Joaquin Torres, aka Falcon No. 2, played by Danny Ramirez. This guy seems to be cropping up in a lot of things lately, but has not really improved his craft at all in that time. He's passable at best, and once he's removed from the narrative, it surprisingly has a drastic jump in quality toward the end.
Coincidence? I think not!
Coming in second place in the minor character Olympics is Ruth Bat Saraf.
Who?
If you thought that Scarlett Johansson and Florence Pugh were just too convincing as gun-toting martial arts badasses, then you're in luck. Because Ruthie is played by the single least imposing human being on the entire planet, Shira Haas. At no point can anyone take this woman seriously. She barely cracks 5 feet and looks as though she exists primarily on a diet of tapeworms. This is not aided by barely being able to hear a word she says whenever she's on screen. Her role is as minuscule as she is and barely seems worth the controversy it produced. Another wasted actor is Giancarlo Esposito as Sidewinder, the leader of the Serpent Society. This is a character no one has heard of who leads an equally obscure group of rejects from the 80s. Seriously, what favor did Esposito owe here?
I was acting. Or was I?
because it's painfully obvious he was called in to try and salvage anything he could out of this role. Though it did lead to a little game I got to play called Spot the Digitally Inserted Post-Production Scene. By far the most surprising addition to the cast was bringing back Tim Blake Nelson to play Samuel Stearns, a character who was forgotten for 16 years after The Incredible Hulk, hidden away for the sin of being in a movie Marvel would like to forget. Truthfully, he may be the most entertaining part of the film as he basically chews the scenery every chance he gets.
Unleash your anger. Unleash your hatred.
You could crush them all.
You know, every time I think Disney has perfected the art of wasting money, they somehow surprise me. They're no strangers to reshoots and rewrites, but I can't recall a single time where they were so cavalier about blowing the budget. Reworking these movies is usually fairly simple. A few scenes didn't work, so they had to go back and fix them. But here there's reports of massive overhauls to the script because test audiences hated the entire thing. These include entirely new plots requiring additional characters. I mean, I've heard of characters being removed post-production, but this one's new to me. All this leads to some very inconsistent rumors about the budget, which supposedly ballooned to $350 million. This is a figure which Disney has refuted, though I have my doubts as to the validity of that. The movie's release window is also problematic. Having it delayed multiple times has added to the marketing nightmare. It's now being released on Valentine's Day, aka rom-com weekend. This is the single worst week for a guy movie to release.
Make daddy a sandwich.
Lest we forget, this is when Madam Web came out last year. Though in fairness, to classify that as a movie is being very, very generous. It's essentially the dumping ground for productions that studios have lost faith in. The delays also mean what little hype train existed for Captain America has long since shunted up to the station. And by hype train, I mean... in the past, even the worst promoted and tested installments of the franchise would be carried by the MCU juggernaut.
You must not know who I am. I'm the juggernaut, bitch. I'm gonna hit you with your own pimp.
Through strategic placement and the clever use of self-promoting post-credits scenes to tease the next chapter. I bet if any one of you listening tried to recall the last post-credits scene that succeeded in exciting anyone, you'd come up as empty as Rachel Zegler's post-Snow White filming schedule. Hell, the last MCU film to come out was Deadpool and Wolverine, and it did its best to make a mockery of the entire genre. Even the merchandising has been laughable. Does anyone even remember when McDonald's toy line for this film came out?
No fucking idea.
May of last year. There were babies conceived and born in the time between then and now. I can only imagine a child 9 months ago opening up their Happy Meal to discover a Joaquin Torres plush and not having any fucking clue who that is.
Who?
Though honestly, even now they likely still wouldn't. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Mackey's little faux pas during the media rounds.
To me, Captain America represents a lot of different things, and I don't think the term America should be one of those representations.
Look, I get what he was trying to say here. Captain America represents the ideals and spirit of the American dream, not a government landmass or agenda. The mantle itself is exemplary of all that we as a nation are meant to stand for, and not just beholden to a president or borders. This is a sentiment I wholeheartedly agree with. However, this is not what Mackie said at all. This came off like he vaguely recalled some talking points that a PR rep for Disney gave him months ago but didn't bother to commit them to memory. And by the time he realized how bad he had butchered them, it was too late. So now to try and save face, he's pulling a random story out of his ass about his grandfather picking cotton as a kid. In terms of the actual production value of the film itself, it's pretty much exactly what you've come to expect. Lots of CG, terrible sound mixing, and a general sense that we've seen literally all of this before. Even with the expedited runtime, it does very little to make this feel like any less of a slog. Considering how much was added and reworked in the script, I was truly surprised by the news that this was going to be the shortest MCU installment to date. But rather than a smooth, efficiently running engine of a narrative, we get a series of misfires as subplots seem to crop up and stall out from start to finish. Many characters disappear for long tracts of time, requiring an update of their status when they're reintroduced. This feels like less of a movie and more like a student project where the assignment was to take an entire season of a TV show and trim it down into a 2-hour montage of the important parts. I think it's safe to say that this film will not be setting the world on fire. Based on the early returns, it will struggle to even make its budget back. The real one, not the fake reported one. This comes down to a number of things, but mainly that this just wasn't anything that anyone wanted.
Man, shut the hell up.
It's a film that's simply behind the times, but Feige hasn't figured that out. In the years since Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Marvel has fallen off so much that they've had to lean into nostalgia, parody, and ensemble pieces with multiple big-name characters, all boxes that this movie simply can't check. Had this come out maybe 3 years ago, it could have had a chance at success. But with the ever-dwindling popularity of the MCU, this was doomed for failure from the start. And if that doesn't convince you that this is just another corpse to throw on the pile of burning money known as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, I don't know what to tell you. So now to try and save face, he's pulling a random story about his grandfather picking cotton out of his ass. Wait, that doesn't sound right at all. That scripting's gonna have to change. Holy shit, it's getting fucking late.